As part of this program's ongoing coverage of the 5G issue, I had the great pleasure of interviewing Olle Johansson, a world-leading authority in the field of EMF radiation and health effects. He's an associate professor at the Karolinska Institute, retired as of November 2017, and has a long background in the neurosciences, and has co-authored together with his supervisor, Professor Thomas Hochfeldt, and many others, including Nobel laureates, 143 original papers, reviews, book chapters, and conference abstracts. He spoke to us from his home in Stockholm. On the subject of electrosensitivity, many people perceive it as a disease or an illness, but my understanding is you see it as a cellularly correct response to electromagnetic radiation. Could you help our listeners make sense of this different framing of what most people would see as debilitating?
Well, it's actually not my understanding, really, because this goes back to both national and international handicap laws and regulations, and above all, the United Nations Convention and special human rights acts for people with functional impairments or disabilities, as they were used to be called. And in them, the person with a functional impairment is not the patient. He or she does not have any diagnosis and are not supposed to get any treatment. And a typical example, which I give when I give lectures, is that I cannot speak French. And people laugh about that, but that is actually the definition of the United Nations. And of course, to not be able to speak and understand French or Swedish is not an illness in any way. It just points to that the environment is inferior to your own personal needs, and through accessibility measures, such as someone meeting me at Charles de Gaulle in Paris when I arrive for a conference and helps me through the streets and obstacles, and that's the kind of functional accessibility adaptment. And that's the way the Swedish authorities look upon all types of functional impairments. It's the environment that is ill, it's the environment who should be treated, and also what has been learned from the United Nations and other authorities is that the numerically big winners are actually everyone, because we all would benefit from, for instance, a phased-off sidewalk for a person in a wheelchair. We could use it for our bicycle, for our skateboard, our shopping cart, baby pram, and so on. And the same would go for electron hypersensitivity if we would lower the exposure levels from the colossal, astronomical levels we have today down to what these people need for their everyday living, then maybe you and I would not get a brain tumor, for instance. So everyone would be a winner.
If I put my hand close to a flame and I feel pain, it's not that I should be treated for the pain. We should be looking to put out the fire. Is that kind of like along the lines of what you're talking about there?
Yeah, that's a very good analogy, actually, and either put it out or put some kind of shield so that you don't burn yourself, or move it. And that's actually very much what we talk about when it comes to health effects of electromagnetic fields. The remedy for electrohypersensitive persons is exactly that, either to move away the source of irritation or to shield it in some way.
Now, in 2011, the World Health Organization International Agency for Research on Cancer classified RF radiation from any source as a Group 2B, possibly carcinogenic to human agent. For listeners unfamiliar with these categories, how would the public and health authorities normally respond to the presence of a Class 2B carcinogen in their homes, schools, if it was, say, a drug or something in the air or water?
I mean, I would say that everyone would retract from that kind of exposures. I mean, you can compare them, for instance, to diesel exhaust, petrol fumes, welding smoke, and whatnot. And I have never come across a parent who want their kids to sit in a schoolroom full with diesel exhausts or welding smoke. So for the electromagnetic fields being classified in the same category would mean, I would say, in an adult responsible world, that we would take the kids out of that school and not be allowing them to be exposed. But as you said, not very much practically actually happens, with some exceptions. There are countries that have put a ban for various reasons, for instance, in schools. Unfortunately, Sweden and United States are not among them, but countries such as the Solomon Islands, Nigeria, Uganda, Indonesia, and so on. From my point of view, it seems as the health authorities in these countries do take a much better responsibility for their citizens.
Now, we've heard a number of other concerns beyond the carcinogenic properties related to wireless and EMF radiation. There's damage to the blood-brain barrier, DNA damage, cognitive impairment, infertility in men. As someone who's studied these effects for decades, which of these effects do you think should be of paramount concern to the public?
Well, in a sense, this is very interesting you bring this up, because when I give lectures, I point to studies that have shown that various types of man-made electromagnetic fields would produce like headaches. And then I ask the audience if they want to have a headache from their cell phone or laptop or baby alarm. And so far, after nearly 4 years, no one has stood up and said, oh yeah, that's exactly what I want to have. So already with this kind of minuscule impact on your health, like a slight headache, people just say no. And of course, down the line, you'll pass, as I mentioned, leakage of the blood-brain barrier. No one says yes to that. Damage to your DNA, impacts on your sperm cells and whatnot. And I would say that what keeps me awake nowadays are studies regarding bacteria. For instance, an American study by Tahiri and co-workers that in 2017 showed that normal bacteria that you and I have on us and in us right now, when they were exposed to Wi-Fi router radiation and the second generation mobile telephony type radiation, not very much happened apart from one thing, namely they became antibiotic resistant. And the very same year, 2017, in Europe, the G20 countries had a special meeting about the fact that more than 25,000 Europeans are put to premature death because of antibiotic resistance in healthcare. And it was said that by 2050, more than 10 million people worldwide would die prematurely because of this. And you have to remember that the G20 countries did not know about the Tahiri results on bacteria, and Tahiri and his co-workers did not know about the G20 summit. So if you mix these two together, the 10 million people by 2050 could maybe be 7.6 billion people, because if we do not have any antibiotics that will work properly, and I asked around with my medical colleagues, and they pointed to that soon people would start to die again from a splinter in the thumb, as they did at the end of the 1900th century.
Yeah, that's a pretty profound effect, and not one what we'd normally associate with this technology. But speaking of other organisms, I mean, we know the things like apparently bee colonies and birds and other organisms and inhabitants of the ecosystem are also facing adverse affects. Which of those effects might I ask maybe stand out for you that should additionally be of concern to the public?
Well, I would probably pick out pollinators and honeybees and that kind of insects and impacts on them. But at the same time, I have to be honest with you and say that some of the studies that have come forward are not, how should I put it, are not the very best. I mean, I would like to replicate them, and I have tried for years and years to get enough money to be able to do well-controlled studies, so you can rule out different confounders. But the studies that are around, and there are quite a number, they all point to that maybe we are all at jeopardy, not only human beings, but all animals, insects, plants, bacteria, and whatnot. So it's high time to really sit down and look very carefully at the effects that have been shown. And often when you meet people in power, for instance, they are not particularly interested. I have just recently written to my own prime minister, and after nearly 2 months, he has still not responded. But some people that actually have listened very, very carefully to me and have acted for more than 20 years ago are, and I was nearly going to say, of course, the manufacturers of telecom systems, the operators, all the insurance and reinsurance companies, and also radiation protection authorities, the World Health Organization, and so on. The big players have all abandoned ship and swam away years and years ago. And that's more telling that any test tube or mice or insect I could put up and discuss right now. They have really decided that they should not touch this with a pair of pliers even.
Interesting. I'm curious about the reaction of the insurance agencies to these tests, because I can understand a politician or a regulator, even an industry scientist, being bought off or bamboozled into thinking that, okay, this is perfectly safe. But the insurance industry, I mean, they literally cannot afford to ignore the 28,000 plus studies showing negative biological effects of this radiation. How do you see the insurance agencies responding to the kind of science that you've been putting forward? Is it being enacted in their policies?
Well, already in 2002, I think it was, so that's 18 years ago, I was at a conference in London, and all the big insurance companies like Lloyd's UK, Swiss Re, which is the largest reinsurance company in the world, and a small Swedish company called Skandia, they were all present. And there was a lawyer who stood up and he asked them, all of them, and said, hey, now you have listened to scientists like Olle Johansson from Sweden. So what is your conclusion? And then I remember that the people from the insurance industry, they all said that for them, it was not the question whether this was dangerous or not. They knew it was dangerous. The only question for them was who is going to pay for the party in the future, and they will not do it. So therefore, they have this, and it's completely public. You can look at it on the internet. They have this blacklist, and on it you would find health effects of all types of electromagnetic fields. You will also find what you today have in like clothes, furniture, in medicine, food, baby products, and so on, namely nanotechnology. They do not take any form of responsibility for that, but it's sold to us as being completely safe, of course. And also, they don't cover damages from GMO and gene-modified organisms, such as gene-modified food products. And again, for me as a consumer, this is more telling than any scientific paper I could read on the internet. They have decided and they have acted. So they have like a precautionary principle of their own, and the precautionary principle in their case is to protect themselves.
Could you comment on the as this 5G, because we haven't even talked about the 5G yet with the space satellites and the multiple antennas. Can you maybe comment on any additional concerns you have specifically that relate to this new technology coming out? Is it just that it's going to be more of the same, only more intense, or are there perhaps new dangers that lurk in relation to that rollout?
Well, that's also a very, very important issue you bring up, and I could just start by saying that there has been an enormous debate worldwide regarding 5G, much more than we saw with 4, 3, 2, and 1G. And of course, 5G right now is rolled out in all countries without any form of pre-marketing testing, no due diligence, no strategic health or environmental assessments. So in that way, at least here in the European Union, the 5G rollout is flaunting the precautionary principle, and there has been no public consultation, no informed public consent, which is normally the golden standard. And also for 5G, as for the previous 4, 3, 2, and 1G, it's rolled out without any biologically based exposure standards. But at the same time, from 4, 3, 2, and 1G, and similar other sources of man-made electromagnetic radiation, we have, as you said before, a huge amount of scientific papers clearly pointing to that this kind of radiation is damaging and harmful to public health and to ecology. And also, of course, 5G will have an enormous price tag in the form of a huge ecological footprint, including massive carbon footprints of thousands of satellites and millions of more transmitters and trillions of 5G and the Internet of Things gadgets, all beaming at each other and at us, and all increasing, of course, planetary resource depletion. And the driving force here is, of course, greed and not need. And it's not so easy to approach, like a person who loves their cell phones and their computers and so on, because 5G has promised us that we should even faster be able to download from the internet and use different surfing functions and whatnot. And of course, that's tempting, but I think it's high time to really start looking in a serious way on all the research. And as we said before, we are not talking about small things. We are talking about antibiotic resistance in bacteria, damage to the DNA, leakage of the blood-brain barrier, association to different type of cancer tumors, and so on. And but again, it's like a fantastic drunken party, and consumption is at high speed. And the few scientists like myself who put up a warning sign or a warning finger, we are shoveled aside most of the time. And but I mean, I've taken on myself to always try to inform the general public, and no one knows who I am. So just recently I took a commuter train here in Stockholm, and next to me there was a woman in her 40s, and I leant forward to her and said, hey, I read about these cell phones and the radiation, and the World Health Organization that the latter has cancer classified the radiation. And then she looked with dismay, I would say, at me and said, you are nuts, you are lying to me. No, please, you have a smartphone, I said, Google it. And she started to do that. And after a few minutes, she looked very sheepishly at me, I would say, and said, you were right. Why has no one informed me about that? So I'm trying to sort of put seeds into the mental ground, and then I have to leave to others to develop these seeds. And, in contrast to you, I'm a very old man, so I don't have many years left. And I've tried for 40 years to study this, inform the general public, inform politicians. I was just recently, a few weeks ago, down in Rome with the Italian parliament. So it is changing. You know, when I started the whole career in this specific field, my very first lecture was actually given in an freezing ice cold underground bicycle shed. I was shaking, shattering when I stood there. I couldn't show any pictures, nothing, you know. And 30, 40 years later on, I am very honorably invited to people like the parliamentarians in Rome, and I've been all over the world. And so it is a change, but I want to see more. And I have also always talked about that we need to come up with tomorrow's green, human and environmental friendly technology. And there are companies that are now thinking along these lines. For instance, in Poland, here in Europe, we have a company called Modita, and they have brought forward a low radiation cell phone. And also there is a Swedish company called RP, which stands for Radiation Protection, RP of Sweden. And they produce like a case for a cell phone, which dramatically reduces the radiation levels. And these are steps, of course, but they're very important steps. And more, both scientists, politicians, civil servants, and the general audience, they are asking that question when I come to meetings and conferences the last 5 years. What can we actually do? What can I do to protect myself? Could I in any way lower the radiation? And from the beginning I had to say, no, not very much. But now there are things coming up, you know. And of course, to bring out a low radiation cell phone that would be proven safe would be an enormous winner for any company and country. So I suppose while we talk, there are young men and women in a garage in California actually inventing it right now.
So it sounds like there's some good news on the horizon in spite of the warnings. Professor Olle Johansson, we've got to go now, but it's been a great pleasure and honor to host you on the program. Thanks so much for sharing your vast knowledge and understanding with our listenership.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Michael. It was a great honor to participate in your radio program here. Thank you.
We've been speaking with Professor Olle Johansson, a retired associate professor with the Karolinska Institute in the Department of Neuroscience and world-leading authority in the field of EMF radiation and health effects. He joined us from Stockholm.